let's talk about Erik Ten Hag and Manchester United. Obviously, the big challenge right now is for them to reach a Champions League spot. And by the way, United today, right, will be traveling to Nottingham Forest in the 5th round of the FA Cup, and arguably the biggest game of their season right now. And guess what? After that, they'll be facing Manchester City in the Manchester Derby. So there's a lot going on. Now, Augie has written a great piece here about Erik Ten Hag and the pluses and minuses regarding his future, and there's a lot at stake here. So let me just straight away ask you this, Mark Ogden. Without Champions League for next season, what does that mean for Erik Ten Hag's future, do you think?
Well, I think it makes it pretty at Man United. So the fact that he's got one more season on his contract after this one, United have an option to extend it by a further year, is what they do on contracts, but ultimately he's got a year left of his contract. So to kind of see that third year in his contract, he has to get into the Champions League. I think Erik Ten Hag failing to get United in the Champions League is a big cross in the negative column, isn't it? You know, the team aren't playing particularly well right now. The tactics are questionable. We've had a lot of high-profile pundits question his tactics recently, and the fans are beginning to wonder how he's mismanaging so many big-name players. So if they fail to get into the Champions League, I think there are big issues at play. But one of the biggest issues, if they don't get in the Champions League, is financial, because if you let them set in the Champions League, it's going to leave maybe a 40, 50 million pound hole in their budget. To sack Ten Hag, I've been told it would cost in the region of 14 million pounds. So 14 million pounds to hire a new guy, you're looking at maybe 10, 12 million pounds just to get through the door. 30 million pounds, 50 million pounds shortfall Champions League. There's a lot of big financial questions for the club to answer here. And you know that we've been told that by the new regime, INEOS, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, that they want to stop the mistakes made by the previous regime in terms of financial waste. Well, if they're going to sack a manager, it's going to cost them a lot of money to do it, and it's going to affect the FFP situation. It's not a good start, but obviously you don't keep a guy that's too expensive to get rid of him. You have to pick the right guy to do it, no matter what it costs.
Gab, as we mentioned in the intro, they're facing Nottingham Forest today in the FA Cup, and then Manchester Derby later this week. Now, you know, obviously Champions League qualification, Europe is important. If they bow out of the FA Cup, that's another season without a trophy. The only trophy they've gotten since 2017 is the Carabao Cup, which was last season. So I guess my question is the same to you in a similar notion. What do you make of United's journey so far, specifically now that they have a new CEO, new director of football, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's new stake? What do you make of that and the future of Erik Ten Hag as we look ahead, especially in a summer where a lot of clubs are going to be looking for new managers?
Well, you know that when I'm a guest, I get to be pedantic. So, first of all, Mark, did you say 14 million or 14 million? I just want to make that very clear. 1-4. Okay, all right. Because for a minute there, you know, it sounded like really sort of some sort of scary type Graham Potter, Julian Nagelsmann type situation. I don't think that is an enormous amount of money, because that is generally what you expect a United manager to be paid. So in that sense, if you do make a change, I don't think the damage is enormous. Also, and I'm sorry, but I woke up from my nap not that long ago. Did you say they have a new director of football, Luis?
Yes, that's right.
Dan Ashworth's been appointed today, or
Mark Ogden, can you confirm, or are we getting close to that notion?
Dan Ashworth will be Man United's director of football. It's not happened today, and it won't happen for a few months yet. But as we go, we'll have a new CEO, a director of football, potentially, possibly a new manager.
Okay. Yeah, I don't care about the new CEO, whatever, within the context of the Ten Hag decision. I think the single most important thing, and I go back to saying, I feel like one of those like crazy people like shouting like into the wind. You can't fire, or you should not fire or retain Erik Ten Hag based upon results on the pitch, about whether you win trophies or not. Manchester United are not good right now. They are not where they should be in light of their history and in light of their resources. You keep or you fire Erik Ten Hag based upon whether you think they can get you where you want to be, right? Ratcliffe said 3 years. 3 years they hope to be competing for, or on the par where City are now, or whatever. If you think he can get you there, then you stick with him. You don't need to go and rush right away and give him a new deal. You know, you've got that option here that Mark talked about. But I think that is the way they have to think about it. And more importantly, the person making that decision, or making a big part of that decision, should be Dan Ashworth. So I was going to say, like, unless you know for a fact that Ashworth's coming, unless you can right now, while he's still under contract with Newcastle, unless you have access to Ashworth and Ashworth has access to the information that he needs to make that decision, you do not make any kind of decision. I mean, I don't know if this makes sense to you guys, but it's important that we have accountability. We know who's making the decisions. So in a roundabout way, it definitely should not depend on whether they advance in the FA Cup. It should depend largely on what Dan Ashworth thinks. And if Dan Ashworth says, listen, I can't make that decision until I'm actually there, until I'm actually talking to people, then you should wait until such time.
Okay, so
let's jump in there. Can I just jump in there? I think listen, Gab's right in a technical and legal sense that United can't do any deals with Dan Ashworth until he's through the door. But it'd be naive to think that if Erik Ten Hag finishes 7th or 8th this season and wins no trophies, that they can't remove the manager just because they haven't got a director of football in. These decisions have to be made, and I'm sure WhatsApp messages get exchanged.
Right. You're going to have to. It might not be 20 million, like many, like everybody seemed to write all of a sudden. But you're going to commit, right? You've committed on a new rebuild, right? You've committed on doing things in the correct way. There has to be accountability. You cannot have a situation where you say you sack Ten Hag because you finish 7th and you don't like finishing 7th, and then Ashworth comes in, Ten Hag goes somewhere else, he does brilliantly, whatever, you bring in a dud, and then Ashworth's like, well, don't look at me, I wanted to keep Ten Hag. I mean, you can't have that. So I think either you say, Ashworth, you're definitely coming, even though we can't say it yet for legal reasons and those scummy lawyers again, or you say, Ashworth, we're bringing you in to make the big decisions. This is the biggest decision we have to make right now, is whether to keep him or not. I think it's critical that he be the key driver together with Brailsford and whatever wise people Ratcliffe surrounds him with. That has to be who makes the decision. It can't just be a reaction based on where you finish in the league.
John Poggy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that things move differently than that. I'm pretty sure that Man United have had conversations with Dan Ashworth right now, Dave Brailsford, Jim Ratcliffe, because if they hadn't, how do they know that he wants to come to Man United? So if they're looking for a new manager in the summer, names will have been mentioned, names will have been addressed. Maybe look at this guy, look at that guy. I don't think Man United, yes, Gab's right, there has to be a process and accountability, they've got to get it right. But also sometimes they have to fast track decisions. And if they feel at the end of this season that Erik Ten Hag isn't the right guy, results aren't great, tactics aren't great, players are unhappy, there's not a lot of things in Erik Ten Hag's favour right now which would say, yeah, let's stick with the guy. And also, anecdotally as well, if you look at clubs that have got new owners or new regimes, they generally get a new manager within the first 6 to 12 months. It's very rare that a new regime doesn't. So I think everything points towards the fact that Erik Ten Hag has to do something quite spectacular to be in the manager's job at United next season.
Let's remind yourself, this is not a new owner. This is a guy who's bought, 26.7%.
It's a new regime.
A new regime, but a new regime where if they want to actually spend money, they're just in charge of the football side. But as soon as they want to actually spend money, and it takes money to run a football club, they need to get the Glazers to sign off on it, right? So it's a new owner, but it's not like an entirely new owner. It's a new part owner who has to ask permission from the Glazers. I mean, that's the reality facing United right now.
Okay, so let's play a hypothetical for a second, and let's wrap this up because we've got a few other things to talk about. But Gab, let me go to you, and then Augie, you have the last word right after. Gab, let's play the hypothetical. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's not a new owner, and let's remember the Glazers have not gone anywhere right now as well. But let's talk about this. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, Manchester United, right, lose to Nottingham Forest, or they lose eventually and they don't get a trophy in the FA Cup. Let's say that Manchester United's run in the Premier League goes even lower, and they don't even, forget Champions League, they don't even get Europe. What do you say there? Does Erik Ten Hag leave in the summer, should you think? Or do you still think, no, because we have a full summer under a new regime, as Mark Ogden stated, that he should stay? What do you think?
This is why you hire a director of football.
Let's say you're the director of football.
If I'm the director of football, Ten Hag's gone. It is very simple. It's gone. But again, I think most United fans would feel that way, right? 2 years, no real forward progress. Your big signings have either been duds or they've been injured. Enough, right? And your pal Murta would probably be gone too, because you'd want to turn the page, and Ashworth would probably want to new people, or me in this case, since I'm role playing as Dan Ashworth. But yeah, I think if I were in charge, I think that would be. But that's because, in my opinion, United haven't really progressed. Ten Hag hasn't brought the style of football and the approach that he had at Ajax, which presumably is why they signed him in the first place. That's kind of the main discriminant that I would use.